Vaughn, I'm going to start with you. And if you just begin, I know it's already fragile. We're already getting indications that there might not be true support behind this announced deal, but walk us through what it actually contains.
Right. The framework of this deal, and David has been very, very key on making sure that it is understood that this is a framework of an arrangement where the administration and the Board of Peace is hopeful that Hamas will begin to disarm. That is the headline out of this. And the suggestion is that in exchange in Gaza, that there will be 5,000 soldiers made up of a conglomerate from several other Arab countries that will be able to provide security in Gaza as well, with 20,000 police officers. Now, there's a lot to this, because who has not co-signed on at this point in time is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And Bibi Netanyahu, just last year at the White House with President Trump, when he was asked about a two-state solution, President Trump deferred to Netanyahu. And Netanyahu made clear that Israeli security forces must always maintain security control over Gaza. That's not what this deal says. Bibi Netanyahu has also said that the Palestinian Authority cannot be a presence inside of Gaza. And what the Board of Peace is saying is that they will be there in an advisory type of form. So that is where suddenly the administration is suggesting that there is advancement in as part of a future for Gaza, and a place where Palestinians could even see reconstruction funds. At the same time, that is incumbent upon the Israeli Prime Minister jumping on board as well. And of course, Hamas also actually coming through and agreeing to disarm, which has long for now decades been far from the case that they've been willing to agree to that.
David, I want your take on the details that we have so far, because you have seen these sensitive deals brought forward in the past. And I think there are just every level of it. There are like 10 follow-up questions, right? I mean, even when you just ask yourself, what is an international stabilization force? Is there true buy-in from all of the countries that would have to contribute to keeping people safe in that region? When it comes to the question of who's actually, like, does Hamas lay their arms down first and then the Israelis withdraw? Or are they not going to do that until the Israelis withdraw? As Vaughn has already indicated there, Netanyahu saying no. It seems like we're just back at square one already.
Yeah, and what I was on a call last night where there were U.S. officials on it and then members of the Board of Peace, and they were frank about all the stages this is going to take, that this is this very slow process, and they will pause and verify if step one, like a certain amount of weapons are being turned in by Hamas. And if that hasn't occurred, the whole process stops. Step two, you start training some Palestinians to be police officers, and they will stop and see if they're properly trained. You know, a number of peacekeepers, are they coming in from these countries? So they were realistic about that. What was unusual and not realistic was the way the president posted this on Truth Social as this massive, step forwards towards a lasting peace, as an agreement. It's a framework. And I've seen this happen. It did, and thank you for saying that about other countries. Look, the UN's a mess and a disaster, but this is just like what they were talking about doing in Afghanistan after the fall of the Taliban. It was supposed to be a stabilization force. You're going to train up a new Afghan government. They had elections. And
how did that turn out?
It went well in the first few years, and then the Taliban insurgency sort of came back. There was a lot of corruption in the Afghan government, and, I guess it's a long story, but 20 years old story, but they think it's interesting because the Trump administration thinks they can solve this better. It was just a question of getting in these kind of businessmen, and they're going to get it done and being tough. And I think they're seeing how intractable this problem is. In the end, as Vaughn said, will Bibi Netanyahu, if he's prime minister, accept this? And will Hamas actually follow through with every step of this agreement? We just don't know that yet.
Stephen, the other piece of this that I think is a bit strange is that so much of this Board of Peace, or not so much of it, the entire thing is actually constructed around President Trump himself. He's sort of put himself as indefinitely the guy this whole thing centers around. There have been questions about the ways in which he's been able to pull money and support into all of it. And so from the outset of the announcement of this, I think people questioned its credibility and seriousness just from that starting point. What do you see, and how do you think other partners in the region view the Board of Peace?
Well, what we know is, despite the pledges to donate millions and billions of dollars to the Board of Peace, that it is mostly broke. And the president has pushed for this announcement because he doesn't have much else of a success in his other efforts in the Middle East. Despite the announcement, there are no 5,000 to 20,000 foreign or Palestinian police officers. Right now, we have commitments from Albania, Kazakhstan, Morocco. The numbers right now are in the tens, not even the hundreds. Indonesia has pulled out. This is an agreement that is likely to fail. It's over a course of 6 to 8 months. Hamas has already said it said nothing about disarmament. It's only talked about decommissioning weapons. So I think the Arab world, the partners in the region, are looking at this in the way that most objective analysts would look at this, is that perhaps this was a good idea. They came to the announcement for the establishment of the Board of Peace out of deference to the president of the United States, but no one really gave it much prospect for success. And the fact that the major players in the Arab world so far have said nothing and are not really directly involved in this would suggest that they remain quite skeptical that it's going to be fulfilled. The Israelis are going to say they are not going to withdraw until Hamas disarms. Hamas is going to say it won't disarm until Israel withdraws. And it's going to be litigated forever until everybody forgets about the Board of Peace episode.
You know, Peter, if the president were really serious about this, why wouldn't he have made this announcement side by side with Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was at the White House just a matter of days ago?
Yeah, I think for all the reasons we've just been talking about, because Netanyahu's not on board, right? If he really had an agreement that had the buy-in of Israel, he would have done it when the prime minister was here in town for the Lindsey Graham Memorial Service. They didn't do that. Now, Netanyahu came out of that meeting saying it was a very good meeting. So it begs the question of how much this was discussed in that meeting and what was said about it. But I mean, I think to Stephen's point, I mean, like, the truth is, the Middle East is littered with paper from agreements that never actually turned out to mean that much on the ground. And that's why I think people are naturally skeptical of this one. I mean, it was just not that long ago the president hailed the landmark ceasefire agreement with Iran, which lasted all of 3 weeks, obviously. And so we have to be careful. It's worth being skeptical. At the same time, it shows that he is still trying. He is still in there looking for some way to turn Gaza into a somewhat better situation. There's a lot in this paper that would be good if it ever actually happened. It's just that, history has made skeptics out of everyone.
Vaughn, I'm sure you saw that this week Netanyahu sat down with ABC and he was asked very directly if he supports a future Palestinian state, and he gave a pretty definitive no. And I wonder, as the president and his allies see Netanyahu say statements like this to the U.S. media, if there is a growing frustration there. Their relationship has had some tensions in recent months. But that kind of thing seems to undermine what the president is trying to deliver for the American people very directly.
Exactly. And what was outlined as part of this deal that his own son-in-law was helping negotiate, and Steve Witkoff as well, is an attempt at what would be a quasi-two-state solution. And this is similar to in 2020, back in January 2020, Jared Kushner and the then White House, they made a similar proposal. At the time, it was rejected outright by the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, because it required that they would disarm. It was a non-starter. It wasn't a serious offer on the table. And as part of that offer, it was that Israeli security forces would oversee Gaza, which is why it was a non-starter for Palestinians. And so now suddenly you have a situation where the president effectively, they feel like, have been able to secure concessions with outright tens of thousands of deaths and a lot of destruction in Gaza, but one in which they feel like this is the moment in time, especially that the U.S. joined Israel in its offensive against Iran, where Bibi Netanyahu should make some concessions and try to help the U.S. put an end to the war and put an end to what is playing out in Gaza. And I think that's where you look at the first administration. When we're having this conversation, you can't ignore what happened in the first administration, because the president of the United States in 2017 sought to have Jerusalem be the capital of Israel. He then went and recognized the Golan Heights as Israeli territory. And so time and again, he has given Bibi Netanyahu and Israel a great many concessions in American acknowledgement of what is the Israeli state. And so now when the president is asking for him and his help, I think that that is where you see a president who is frustrated, because here in American politics, he has a heavy hand. But with Bibi Netanyahu, he has given a great amount of deference to him over the last 7 years. Is this a moment where Netanyahu shows deference in return?
Stephen, what are you going to be watching for as we've seen on our screen the president cabinet heading into this Camp David meeting here? When it comes to the announcement of this already shaky deal, the ongoing escalations around the Iran war, do you expect more to come from the president and his inner circle? And are there things that you're expecting or watching for closely as they meet this Friday?
Yeah, I think, look, the president really doesn't have an answer for the problem he's created for himself in Iran. They have threatened escalation. They have escalated, and the Iranians have not changed. So we are stuck. And I think that what we'll see from the president is a lot more bombast. On this question of Gaza, my sense is that the president is going to try to jam all the parties into some sort of statement agreeing to it. I would take some issue with the focus, though, on Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is a issue before the Israeli people, this question of a two-state solution. About 68% of the Israeli public after October 7th, that continues to be the same number, reject the idea of a two-state solution. All of Prime Minister Netanyahu's opponents in the Israeli electoral season refused to utter the term two-state solution. This is a dynamic that has been unfolding for many, many years and can't just be pinned on Prime Minister Netanyahu. The Israelis after October 7th particularly feel strongly that although they would love to live in peace, they don't believe that they can. So I think the president will continue to mouth these words about both theaters, Gaza as well as Iran, and they have very little connection to what the reality is on the ground. Either the way the Iranians are perceiving things, where they have the upper hand, and in Israel and the Gaza Strip, where the Israelis are opposed to anything that will put their security in jeopardy, and Hamas seems unlikely to actually disarm.